Okay, good afternoon everybody. Welcome to the Insights into FASD. This webinar is part of Adoption Week Scotland 2020 and my name is Ali Brown. I am the FASD project manager and your host for today's session. We're just going to wait for people to join us. We're expecting 150 people this afternoon. So we're obviously just got a couple of minutes while that number of people join in. So hopefully you're in the right place and you are ready to learn all about FASD, and we're excited to bring that to you. I am joined this afternoon by an amazing panel of people who've got lived experience and professional experience of having FASD or having a child with FASD and working with individuals with FASD. So this is a fantastic opportunity to have this many people in this space together. Okay, so it's just a couple of minutes or 1 minute now to our official start time of 1 o'clock, and once we get to that we will get going. Okay, fantastic. Okay, thank you. So welcome everybody to this special webinar as part of Adoption Week Scotland 2020. And my name is Ali Brown. I am the project manager for FASD Hub Scotland, and I'm your host this afternoon along with my fantastic panel of adopted adults who've got FASD, a parent of a child with FASD, an educational psychologist and a social worker. When would you ever find those people all in the same room together? So we're really delighted to have everybody here. I'll just give you a few housekeeping about if you've never joined one of our webinars previously. So if you'd like to ask questions, you can do so using the chat function. If you want to speak to other people that are watching the webinar, we can't see you and we can't hear you. You can use the Q&A section, which you'll find if you're on a mobile device or on a laptop, usually at the bottom of your screen. If you've got any questions directly for the panel, we do hope to be able to have time to take those towards the end of today's session. So please use the Q&A section to do that. And if you just want to say hello or let us know how it's going or anything like that, please just use the chat function. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a quick overview of what we're going to be doing today and how this session has been constructed. So directly after this, I'll just tell you a little bit about FASD Hub Scotland, who we are and what we do. We'll then have a short introduction about what FASD is, and this is going to be brought to us in a video by Dr. Sarah Brown, which was pre-recorded as part of FASD Month Scotland during September. We're then going to hear from the voice of the adoptive parent, and we're really delighted to have with us today Gemma Manning, who's going to be speaking about her lived experience as an adoptive mum. We're then going to meet the professionals, and we're delighted to have with us today Miranda Eodanable, and she's going to completely laugh because we practiced that and I've still got it wrong, but Miranda is how we all know her and love her, and she's an educational psychologist from Edinburgh. And we're also delighted to have with us today Lynn McLaughlin, who is a social worker working in Fife and has been supporting a family who've got a child with FASD for the last 5 years. We'll then move on to hear about the voice of the adults with adults with FASD, and we're absolutely delighted to have with us this afternoon Carol Hunter and Demi Forsyth, who has just disappeared off my screen, so I'm hoping she's still here. And then once we've heard from them individually, we'll come together as a panel and have a discussion based around some questions that we've brought together through the things that you posed to us when you booked for today's webinar. And following that, there'll be the opportunity for Q&As, so we'll take those from the audience, and my colleagues in the background that you can't see but they're here working away will be able to filter those questions for us. So if you want to ask a question, please do. It'll be totally anonymous. We won't be naming people. It'll just be somebody has asked this question. Okay, great. Well, so without further ado, I'm going to move on and just tell you a little bit about FASD Hub Scotland. So we were first launched in June last year, so we're a very new service, although obviously Adoption UK have been supporting families now for almost 50 years. It's our 50th anniversary next year, and many of those families will have children who have got a FASD diagnosis or haven't got that diagnosis but certainly have got prenatal alcohol history. We're funded by the Scottish Government for 3 years initially. Hopefully, fingers crossed, that continues. And we are run by Adoption UK in Scotland, Adoption UK being a national charity. We provide support then for all caregivers, so not just adoptive families, biological families, foster carers, kinship carers. And we do that, anybody can access our service through a variety of means. We provide training directly to those individuals as well as peer support and one-to-one support, and provide services for professionals working with those families. So what does that actually look like, and how does it fit into everything that Adoption UK do here in Scotland? So we run a core service for Adoption UK. If you didn't know, then that's a telephone helpline service that you can ring and speak to one of our helpline advisors who's been specifically trained around adoption. Alongside that, we also run normally, out with COVID, family events, but we've been moving everything online since March, and just as part of Adoption Week Scotland here, we've had 2 great family events already with a magician and also gymnastics. So for those that took part of it, I know my family did in the gymnastics, that was rather entertaining to see happening in your own living room. We also have a lot of different community groups that meet in all different parts of Scotland. And again, lots of those have moved online due to the COVID restrictions. And we run training and workshop events throughout the year. And many of these things have now moved online also, and you can access any of this stuff through our Facebook page or through our website. So as well as our core service within the Scotland team, we also run TESA, which stands for Therapeutic Education Support Services in Adoption. And this is an early intervention service which provides therapeutic input to families, specifically around parenting. And we also have the kinship care team who just recently, Adoption UK along with FASD Scotland, have collaborated to run this service. So it's a great new addition to everything we do. So, and within all of this mix, we've got FASD Hub Scotland, which obviously I'm here today representing our service. And it's great that we're part of this wider team because we can obviously link into all of those things. And this is how our service looks. So it's a tiered support service that we offer. At tier 1, it's kind of that you could engage with us quite anonymously, really, by using our social media, using our website, visiting our YouTube channel, lots of information, lots of signposting to other resources, other helpful places to go. You could use our telephone helpline service and speak to one of our specialist team around FASD. Maybe you just finding out about it, maybe you think your child's got it, you're looking for a diagnosis, or you need some more kind of support one-to-one. You can access those things through our helpline. And that would take you then into a tier 2 service. We've got an online peer support group which is open to all of our caregivers, and that's a really active group with over nearly 250 members of that group now, so representing a wide variety of different families, and very active with people sharing about their personal journey and providing that peer support. And as a team, we input into that as well. We also have individual care support, carers support. So that's where an individual family who perhaps needs just a little bit more support than a half-hour telephone conversation would be able to give. You can have that through working with one of our parent partners or one of our FASD advisors. And quite often that's around things like education, how to get a diagnosis, supporting you to prepare for a meeting, that kind of thing. We also run our own training, and we've developed a couple of different modules, and are delighted that we've recently been joined by 2 qualified teachers who are helping us now develop on to our strategies training as well. And in our tier 3, we have access to the therapeutic enhanced supports, which is through TESA, so things like access to a clinical psychologist, being able to access things like speech and language. It's very much what is relevant and appropriate for that family. And so that is kind of a real broad overview of our service. Just a few faces for you to maybe recognise around the place. Obviously myself, my 2 colleagues, Barbara and Judith, who are our FASD advisors, and then a whole host of other people. We seem to just be collecting people as we go along, which is fantastic. But as I said, we're delighted that Elsa Clark and Lorna Harris have recently joined us as our FASD education advisors, and fantastic to also have the addition of 3 other parent partners as well. Lorna and Elsa also cover that role too. And we have just recruited for our new helpline admin support, so we'll be delighted to introduce you to them later on this year. So there's our contact details, just in case you don't know them. You can take a shot of those now if you want to, but clearly they're available through our website. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen at this point, and hopefully that's given you a very good overview of who we are as FASD Hub Scotland and sort of why we're here today doing this for you. We're now going to watch a short video from Sarah Brown, who's going to explain the background and basic information about FASD. So if you've never been on any FASD training, this is going to give you a really good grounding. If you feel that you have and you know it, then this is just going to be a good reminder. Okay, I'm just looking to one of my colleagues who's now going to share that for us.
So I was asked to give a 10-minute talk on fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, and those of you who know me well will know that I'll struggle to stick to 10 minutes, but I'm going to try very, very hard. I was presuming I was speaking to an audience tonight of people who have perhaps been to training or have heard talks on FASD before. So it really is just an overview. So what is fetal alcohol spectrum disorder? The wordy answer is it's a neurodevelopmental condition resulting from prenatal alcohol exposure. You can then develop some difficulties with learning, development, and I always find it difficult to say difficulties with behaviour, because often it's actually not the child's behaviour, it's how their behaviour is being interpreted that is the issue rather than their behaviour itself. There's some physical findings in the minority, and we're not going to spend too much time on that because the majority don't have any physical findings, and it is really the brain-based difficulties that are causing them to maybe require some additional support within school or home. But some children who have prenatal alcohol exposure do have some specific facial features. They can be small for their age and also have a comparatively small head size compared to another child of the same age. But overall, the majority of children don't have any physical findings. They have patchy profiles, where patchy profiles is really a description to say they don't necessarily meet criteria for a learning disability. Only about a third of children would have the criteria for learning disability, but they can have really quite significant academic difficulties, social difficulties, without any of the external clues that people often look for when they're thinking about alcohol-related diagnosis, such as fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. I've put the signed guideline there simply because I know one of the questions was regarding guidelines for diagnosis, and this was the first UK guideline. It's based very much on the Canadian guidelines, and for those of you who are perhaps professionals, that would be a useful link for you. So very briefly, only about 10% of children have facial features, and they're described as short palpable fissures, which is kind of smaller eye openings. The philtrum is the bit between your nose and your top lip, and that can be smooth. It doesn't need to be completely smooth, it's just indistinct sometimes. And then this thin upper lip, but again, I think that's quite an extreme example. It's almost no upper lip, so it can just be a thinning of the upper lip. But the main point is that 90% will not have facial features. And really that's down to timing of when alcohol exposure has taken place during the pregnancy. In this slide, I don't know if I can point, can you see my pointer there? So between kind of weeks 6 to 8 is when the facial features tend to form. And if you've got alcohol exposure at that time, you may have those facial features. But you can see that actually people speak about babies developing, in utero in the first trimester, it's all the organs, and then after that, there's all the brain wiring after that. And when you think about brain wiring, the brain keeps wiring until you're in your mid-20s. So to think that alcohol doesn't have an effect in those latter, second and third trimesters for a redeveloping brain, is obviously doesn't make that much sense. This slide I always like, but I don't like presenting it when there's kind of neuropsychologists on the audience. But my simple take on this is that alcohol affects how brain cells grow. So if brain cells, you can see in the top black and white kind of speckly slide, neurons, so kind of the brain cells, start here, and then they've got to move out to the edges to make their connections. And in the one below, you can see where there's been alcohol exposure, the wee white dots haven't made it all the way out to the edges. And I suppose the way that I sometimes think about that is, in the top one where there's no alcohol exposure, it's like they're forming really strong roads. So I say, I'm in Scotland, so I say the M8 because that's our major motorway between Edinburgh and Glasgow. And that's a kind of an information superhighway. Whereas if you've got alcohol exposed brain cells, it doesn't mean that the information can't get from A to B, but it might be in B roads or A roads or roads that just aren't so fast and aren't so quick to use. So it's about giving young people time to process information. I think that's sometimes one of the things that is kind of overlooked. There's also the statement there that of all the substances of abuse, cocaine, heroin, marijuana, alcohol has this more global effect. And I think one of the things we're seeing in addition to that is the synthetic cannabinoids look like they're having an additional kind of detrimental effect on brain development. So I think that's something that we'll be looking at, in the coming years. But alcohol, depending on what time the brain is exposed to in pregnancy, it can cause a wide variety of difficulties. So prenatal alcohol exposure, how does it affect the brain? It kind of affects the brain wiring. So if you think about, people speak about white matter, myelination, and that's just really the insulation that goes along kind of electrical cables. So it keeps the signal in and keeps it moving fast. And often, if you're needing more time to think of an answer or to process information or to do mental maths in a classroom, you might just not fit in with the rest of the group in terms of the time scale that you've been asked to answer questions. And of course that can then erode children's confidence, young people's, self-esteem. And it's that understanding that it can take a lot longer to lay down information. It doesn't mean that you can't lay down information. It just means that it requires a lot of patience, different techniques, and also different expectations that might not be necessarily based on an individual's age, but more about their ability. And it might be their ability that day rather than the day before, because we know that there's kind of day-to-day variation in what children can manage. The other thing that I think catches a lot of people out, particularly, well, I would say professionals as well, is that young people can often be quite good with their use of language on the surface. So they are able to read and write and chat, and that can mask all manner of difficulties they might be having. But it's difficult for that to be seen as the underlying cause for sometimes maybe why they're finding things a bit more difficult. So these slides I've kind of had permission to use, and in a very, very simple way, I just like that they show that children and young people with FASD brains are working really hard, and they're working really hard because they have less connections. You can see in that more colourful slide, in the control, there's lots of connections from the hemispheres going backwards and forwards. But if you've been alcohol exposed, yes, there's connections, but they're fewer. And on the black background slides, that is kind of functional MRI imaging where you're trying to do a task. So for children and young people who have not had any alcohol exposure, they use a little bit of their brain to do the task. If you have had more alcohol exposure, you light up more and more parts of your brain in order to try and do the same task. And if you did sequential scans going down the way, what you'd find is that the young people who have not had alcohol exposure, they can pick things up much quicker, whereas the same amount of brain would light up again and again and again And it's a bit like, when you're driving a car and you learn to drive and it's all very difficult to start with, and then it becomes quite automated. It takes much, much longer for that level of learning to be embedded so that it's easily accessible for the young person. So it's that over learning that is really important. There's lots of things that affect whether or not alcohol will result in effects for a young person. And just because there's been prenatal alcohol exposure does not mean a young person has FASD. And there's lots of things that mitigate the effects of alcohol, and that can be nutrition, age, metabolism, genetic makeup. And I suppose that's why we have the no alcohol, no risk message, is because we don't know who it's safe for. In some individuals, not safe, sorry, that's the wrong word to use. We don't know who'll be able to drink and not have an affected child. And that's why we have the no alcohol, no risk message, because that's the safest message for everybody who wants to have a healthy pregnancy. When we think about doing the diagnosis, we're looking at different brain domains, and this might be familiar to some of you. And when you look at the SIGN guideline, or when there's an assessment being carried out for FASD, or even when you're just trying to work out how best to help the young person in front of you, whether they've got a diagnosis or not, it's good to kind of think about these areas and think about what age is that young person functioning at. It might not be the same as their chronological age, and actually if you can adapt the way that you are tailoring interventions or thinking about how you're supporting them day to day, then I think it's an important way to kind of try and break down what skills they have and what areas might need a bit more support. The next picture is probably quite well used now, but it just shows that if you only look at expressive language, reading ability and actual age, you might find somebody who looks very able, but if you dig a bit deeper and look about how they manage relationships, how they manage time and money, their social comprehension and kind of maturity, they can be an incredibly vulnerable person. And the more able areas are kind of masking the underlying difficulties. And as you get older, it's harder to see this as a developmental root cause, as often the other difficulties in the young person's life kind of mask those basic neurodevelopmental difficulties. So I kind of debated putting this slide in because I think we're really trying to change the messaging around FASD, because we know that with the right diagnosis, with the right support, the right understanding, all the poor outcomes that are commonly associated with FASD, they're not inevitable. And I think this makes bleak reading. And I think if you are a parent of a young person who you think is alcohol exposed or has FASD, with or without a diagnosis, it's difficult to read these statistics. I always think they're kind of presented as well in a one-off, and actually it feels to me that it's much more sequential. If you've got a young person that's not understood in school and they struggle to attain in school, and they struggle to maybe keep up with their peer group, if they become a bit marginalised, you can see how that makes you at higher risk for poor mental health and subsequently maybe difficulties getting a job. And then the other difficulties that young people can experience kind of hang off those. You know, if you're somebody who has managed to get a stable job, be it whatever, you know, just something that gives you a bit of routine, that can be really a protective feature. So I'm hopeful that with better understanding and better recognition, that these statistics, you know, they're not inevitable. And I think the young people from Canada speak about, you know, origin stories. These don't have to be. This is not an inevitable consequence of having alcohol exposure antenatally. So for successful outcomes, early intervention diagnosis provide a crucial window for opportunity. It allows people to be educated about the condition, provide early intervention, link the resources, and can facilitate a successful transition to adulthood. We also know that protecting young children from any more kind of difficult aspects in their life, so trauma, abuse, changing home environments, these are difficult things for any young person to manage. I think if you've got neurodevelopmental vulnerability, it's just an added difficulty. And we also know that younger diagnosis is protective, and although that slide says less than 6 years, I think that there is kind of evidence that, you know, under the age of, you know, kind of that primary school age is really optimal to try and get the right supports and the right understanding around a young person. So diagnosis alone doesn't improve outcomes. Diagnosis without the understanding that goes with the diagnosis, without understanding that young person within their home, within their educational setting, within their community, if we can tailor appropriate interventions and education, have a good understanding of a young person of what supports and goals they need, we know that we can get good outcomes for young people. I've put a few links there we've got a parent and carer guide, we've also done an educator's guide, and that's been in collaboration with staff in education in Ayrshire. And we've also got the Sign Parent Carer booklet. There's also the FASD Hub, who are kindly hosting tonight, and I'm aware that the audience comes from south of the border also, and so obviously there's other third sectors that are available. And obviously now that we're all online doing webinars and all sorts, all these resources are available to anybody, at the UK and beyond. So that's just some signposting.
Thank you very much. Right. I hope everybody enjoyed that and enjoyed listening to what Sarah was saying. If you've not heard about FASD previously at all, and that was your first introduction to it, then that gives you a good solid grounding to kind of go from. If you have heard about it previously, then this is a good reminder. So we're going to move into the main part of our afternoon, and I'm just going to ask all of my lovely panel if they can unhide themselves and turn their cameras back on. That's brilliant. Thank you, Gemma. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Lynn. I'm just waiting for Demi. Fantastic. Hello. And and Miranda, hopefully she's there as well. So I'll just...
Sorry, Ali, if you don't mind, could you do my video, because I think you stopped it.
Yeah, I don't know, I think.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, there you go. Lovely. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you, everybody. So we're going to just move on now, as I say, to our different sections. And first of all, we're going to hear from Gemma. So I'll just introduce Gemma briefly. She is an adoptive mum of a little girl. And Gemma is going to speak to us now about her experience of being an adoptive parent. Thank you so much, Gemma, for coming and joining us this afternoon.
That's okay. Hope everyone can hear me all right. I think I've pressed unmute. So yes, hi. I'm here to talk a little bit about my family's experience with adoption and with FASD. Our daughter Isabel, she's only 6, but it feels as though we've lived through a lifetime of challenges as parents already. And we're very aware that this is only the beginning of our FASD journey. So Isabel was adopted when she was 8 months old. She was a beautiful baby, very smiley and sociable. She ate really well, she slept really well. Her foster carer described her as a perfect baby, and she really, really was. Around the age of 2, we started to notice some changes. She went from being a really easygoing baby to having these huge meltdowns over the smallest of things. She would hit and bite and headbutt and spit at me and be really defiant, sometimes for no apparent reason at all. We saw some unusual behaviour starting, like flapping her arms when she was excited. She went through strange phases, like retching when she saw the colour red, or blinking really, really quickly for minutes at a time and couldn't seem to stop. And all of a sudden she had so much more energy than all of her friends, and she just couldn't settle on anything, like sitting and listening to a story or playing with her toys for a couple of minutes. She just couldn't do it. She stopped sleeping for more than a few hours a night, but she was never tired. As I've got a background of working with children with learning disabilities, I knew that something wasn't right. some of Isabel's behaviour looked a little bit like autism. Some of them looked a little bit like ADHD, but she didn't really fit perfectly into any of those boxes. And the day it hit me just how obvious it was that something wasn't right was one of the days we were visiting with her foster carer. Isabel was about 3.5, and she was literally bouncing herself off the walls and screeching for no apparent reason. And her foster carer asked me, "What have you done with my perfect baby?" So we started to try and get some help. We asked friends or teachers at first for tips on using timeouts and reward charts, and went down that route for quite a while. That didn't go very well, mainly because Isabel didn't seem to care about getting or not getting rewards. Didn't care. And we pretty much gave up on timeouts when she started ripping the wallpaper off the walls while laughing her head off. So we started asking all the professionals we could think of: the health visitor, the nursery staff, our social worker, the GP. We were first referred to the local paediatric service, where we saw a doctor who gave Isabel a thorough examination, listened to me talk, and then very nicely said that there was nothing she could do, and suggested we go back to social work to see what they could suggest. And we kind of went round in circles like that for a while. Lots of different suggestions were made by professionals and friends, like it's all just a phase, she'll grow out of it. Maybe she was just a really strong-willed child that needed really strong boundaries. Maybe she had attachment issues. People thought that either it was a phase that would pass, or that I needed to go on some parenting courses to handle my daughter's behaviour. Because of course, most of her violent and her aggressive behaviour was, and still is, stored up during the day to unleash when she gets home, to show us how hard she's been working at fitting in with her peers and doing what she's told at school so she doesn't get rejected by others. Throughout all this, for some reason, I never thought to call Adoption UK. It is no exaggeration to say that if I had called them first rather than last, the last few years would have been very different for us. I called them at my lowest point. It was the first time that any professional had said to me on the phone, "I believe you, I've been there, and there is support out there for you." They talked to me about FASD, and it was like a light bulb went off in my head. It explained everything. I went back to the GP again and asked for another referral to the paediatric service. This time around, we saw a different consultant, just by chance, and she knew about FASD. And within 20 minutes, after years of searching, she said she was pretty positive this is what Isabel had. The relief of finally having an answer that day was overwhelming for me and my husband. I actually just threw my arms around her and just said, "Where have you been? I've been looking for you," and just cried at her for about 20 minutes, which was, yeah. I wish I could say that the day Isabel got her diagnosis, that was the end of our struggle. Of course, it wasn't, because of the nature of FASD and of life, really. There are always going to be things that she struggles with and that we struggle with as a family. But the big difference now is that we have support, and it's the right kind of support from people who understand, who have the experience and the skills to help us remember that we're not alone and there are ways through these challenges. I cannot overstate the importance of having that kind of support. For so long, my husband and I had been shouting from the rooftops about what was going on in our home. And although most of the professionals were sympathetic, not one of them had enough knowledge or training about FASD to realise what was actually going on. It makes me sad to think about the difference it would have made in those early days if our health visitor or someone at her nursery had recommended an FASD assessment. And I know there are many more families out there who've had difficult experiences like ours, and a service like the FASD Hub is invaluable to people like me who needed the right kind of help and support. Calling Adoption UK the day that I was at my lowest was the start of a huge shift in how we parent our daughter, how we advocate for her, and how we are moving forward as a family. So if I could wave a magic wand and make changes to the system so that other people wouldn't go through the same things we did, firstly, I would change the approach to FASD diagnosis so that particularly with care experienced children, FASD has to be ruled out rather than ruled in. I would have all educators and professionals within the health and social care sector take part in FASD training so that this condition, which is more common than autism, by the way, could be recognised earlier and the right support for children and their families could be accessed. I would also say that there is still not enough joined up thinking and communication between professionals. My husband and I have to be the go-between who pass information between the doctors, the therapists, the social workers and the educators so that everyone could be kept up to date. And if I'm being honest, because of the very fact that not all professionals know about FASD, it is all too easy for them to judge the parents as being at fault, or at the very least, offer us advice that can be very shaming, and it's just not appropriate. It is exhausting parenting a child with FASD, not least because we're always talking about the challenges we face, and we hardly ever get the chance to say how amazing and smart and determined and funny and creative and beautiful and athletic our daughter is. Because she's the most awesome little person I've ever met, and she is the centre of our world. And I'm sure most parents would say the same about their children. And that's why accessing the right support for them and their families is so important. Thank you.
Not only have I managed to have myself on mute, but then also stopped myself completely, but that's okay. Gemma, thank you so much for sharing that with us all. It's been brilliant to hear your story, and I've now thinking maybe somebody else could sort that out for me. That would be great. Thank you so much. I was just reflecting on remembering when that first phone call was and when we first met you, and yeah, just how far you've come as an individual as well. And it's been such a privilege to be part of that journey and see that happen. I think that for me has got to be one of the best parts of my job, as well as being a parent myself of a child with FASD. So sharing that commonality, but yeah, just seeing you flourish is really brilliant. So thank you so much for your
I'll never forget that day, seriously. Finding an empty room at work to go and cry down the phone and then coming out like, oh! No, thanks,
that's brilliant. You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, well, we're going to hear now from the professionals in the room. So I just gonna, there we go. So I'm just going to welcome to our conversation Lynn and Miranda, and they're going to both speak about being in their professional capacity as a social worker and as an educational psychologist. Just give us a bit of an overview of their role and how that related to FASD and what started them working in this area. So maybe first of all, could we come to Miranda, and if I can ask you to unmute yourself.
Yeah, okay. Hi everybody, my name is Miranda Eodanable. I'm an educational psychologist with the City of Edinburgh Council. And at the moment I'm doing a part-time PhD in FASD diagnosis as well. So I've kind of got professional capacity and kind of my kind of researcher hat on as well at the same time. And I first became involved with FASD through some individual casework within the local authority. And I think that was kind of, I suppose, kind of raising my awareness of FASD, what is this, what's going on, and then kind of considering how, I suppose, as a professional, we would support children in the context of their learning environment. Then in 2015, I attended the Scottish Government training on FASD assessment, and subsequently started doing kind of partnership, collaborative work with NHS Lothian, looking at FASD assessment as well. I suppose at the moment, my kind of current kind of role is, in terms of my casework, is offering consultation and looking at assessment and intervention for individual pupils. And I know we talk about the individual, but it's really thinking about the individual in the context of their, their home environment, what parents are saying, and how they're managing their learning environment, and what's happening in the wider community for them as well. So, what after school opportunities do they have? What are their strengths and interests as well, and trying to support that. And we, in Edinburgh, and I suppose more widely in Scotland, we support that through the Getting It Right for Every Child framework, where we have the schools as a lead, and we support those meetings where we should have a team around the child with professionals, the parent, the child themselves, and everybody trying to access a kind of appropriate plan for the child that recognise their strengths and the areas that they need to develop as well. Within my service, the psychological services, I have a kind of strategic role as well in terms of kind of supporting EP development in terms of their knowledge, and kind of contributing to wider assessment. And I also am collaborating with NHS Lothian in terms of looking at a kind of FASD strategy across Lothians, across the Lothians as well. So there's lots of different kind of bits and pieces that I'm involved with. I hope that answers the question, Ali.
That's brilliantly. Thank you so much. That's great. And obviously Miranda's going to be coming back and being part of the panel in a couple of minutes' time. But if you've got questions that are specifically around education, then please use the Q&A function to be able to pose those, and we can ask her those directly. Thank you very much.
Okay.
I'm just going to ask Lynn to come and share similarly about her journey as a social worker.
Hi everyone, I'm Lynn. I'm a social worker in a very busy children and families team in Fife, and I work with a lot of different complex childcare cases ranging from child protection, permanence, managing risk. It's really hard to actually write down what you do in the day because it always feels so busy. I support children and young people who have been adversely affected by abuse, loss, substance and alcohol misuse, domestic violence, children and young people who have neurodevelopmental disorders, and ultimately that's where my journey with FASD began. And I met the lovely young man that I currently support, and that was just over, well, it's coming up for 5 years actually that I have known this young man, and that was, I had no knowledge of FASD before that. We didn't learn that at university. It wasn't part of the training, and I really learned from the family and from the child himself, and then going off and doing other research or attending Adoption UK training, the Adoption UK conference. That was really where my journey began just almost 5 years ago. And I just wanted to be part of today to really keep spreading the message and that knowledge of FASD and just how difficult those journeys can be for some families. And, you know, if a little bit of support can go a long way, it means a huge amount to that family. And that was why I just wanted to be part of today.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Lynn. And we are so glad to have you here, because hearing from a social worker is not always a thing that we get to do that often in this environment. So it's brilliant to have you here. Thank you so much. So we're going to move on now, and we're going to hear from the voice of two adopted adults who both have FASD as a diagnosis. So I'd really warmly welcome Carol and Demi to our discussion. And I'm just going to spotlight onto Carol and ask her to unmute herself. Hi there. Thank you so much for coming and joining us today. So I'm aware of the fact that for some people there's a little bit of a delay, unfortunately.
Okay. My name is Carol. I'm 37 years young. So my FASD journey is a bit dated, to say the least. I was diagnosed at a young age. My adoptive parents were told I had FASD before they adopted me, so they're fully aware of the implications and what to expect of me, not to basically expect much academically, socially, all of that. But luckily for me, my adoptive mum is very stubborn, like myself, who was like, right, that's fine, she's got that, but I don't want any more support going forward. I can do this on my own, sort of thing. So for me, growing up, there wasn't the support that's here now. You know, I acted out, I got in trouble, did really some stupid things that I really regret now. And my mum just thought it was just me because of my background and things, that I was just acting up because of it being so disjointed and stuff before I got into the environment that I was in at their home. Through sitting with me, doing, you know, books at a young age, reading, always a learning day really. It was still fun, but it was always learning, constant, you know, we go and visit castles and we go and do educational stuff. And I don't understand now why she was doing it at the time. If there was a sports club or a dance club or something, I was to get involved with everything, because she really just wanted me to, you know, socialise more and then get as much, you know, education and opportunities as possible, sort of thing. So for me, personally, I didn't know I had FASD until a much later age, and then it all kind of clicked into place about, you know, how I had been in the past, things I'd experienced, the struggles I had academically, and then being able to do my own research into that, and then basically learning from that as well. So it's been a bit of a disjointed journey for me now. I went back to education after failing miserably at the age of 35 after my adoptive dad passed away, because he encouraged me to go back because he said that I could use my experiences to help others. So I went back to college, did my HNC, HND, did the Open University, did a degree. I'm in my second year of my Masters, and I now work at the college as a guidance advisor. So my journey kind of got back on the right track at a much later age. The understanding of it, obviously I know more about it now, and then my mum's a bit more open up about it, but in the past it was kind of, I think, the way that they looked at it was that going forward, they felt that I had enough labels put on me as a kid, you know, that I was already, you know, care experience, that I already had, you know, this background that had happened to me that I had to process, and they didn't think that put more labels on me would help me going forward, sort of thing. So it was kind of like a protection thing that they did, which I understand why they did it now, but I think that my mum probably could have coped a lot better if she had opened up to the support that was out there at the time, because it was a lot for her and my dad to take on. So it's good now that I can reflect back with her and we can talk about stuff. And my mum says that it's karma now because I have 3 young boys who are very hyper. They don't have FASD, but she says she's a lot of me in them, so, which is quite worrying. But on a positive note, the support and stuff that I got from college meant that I was really being able to flourish. This last 5 years has been absolutely amazing in my own personal journey. And I also volunteer with the Children's Panel as well. So it's been able to use my own experiences and turn them into positives at a later stage, and hopefully, you know, putting, you know, showing my kids that it's never too late to achieve. I think school was difficult, you know, it's kind of at primary school, it was more tailored and it was more one-to-one. You go into secondary school and you're just, I'm not a face in the crowd sort of thing, and that support gets lost. And then coming back to college again, because it's very much, you know, student-centred, you were involved with your learning plans, you were involved with how you wanted things to go forward, and it was much more informed. And I think that that's where the dip went for me. Like I did okay at high school, I managed to scrape through the grades to go to university, but then I dropped out. Whereas now, I think if I'd went to university now, there's so much more support there. It's like I fell through the cracks a little bit. So yeah, I think that's it in a nutshell. I might have went off topic a wee bit.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. I know that when we met with you as a group, those of us who were parenting were just completely in awe and so encouraged by hearing from you and everything that you have achieved later on in life. And just those realities that, you know, there were some difficult times, but actually I think the thing that you said that has stuck with me was that, you know, your past doesn't define your future. And you're absolute living proof of that. So thank you so much, and we're looking forward to chatting some more with you during the panel discussion. Thank you. I can't see if Demi's still with us. Yes, she is. Hi, Demi. Yeah. It's slipped off the end of my screen. It only fits 4 people on at any one time. Thank you so much, Demi, for coming and joining us today. And I'm looking forward to you sharing a bit of your story as well, if that's okay.
Yeah. So I'm 23 as of today. Today's my birthday. What a great way to spend my birthday. So I was diagnosed with FASD at about 2.5. This was around the same time as my adoption went through. I was very lucky to have been fostered by my lovely mum, who went on to adopt me. So I guess I had like the positive of not being moved around care homes and different systems and everything. So I was pretty settled from day one. Growing up for me, there was a lot of issues that I couldn't understand and my mum couldn't understand, like anger issues. I was like that, like one minute I was fine, next minute I was off the walls. So there was a little bit of support, a bit of psychology, but I don't think they quite understood fetal alcohol, so the help wasn't really tailored to what I needed, so it wasn't really much help to me. School was a bit like what Carol said. Primary school was, I felt I had a bit more one-to-one. Like, it was still tough, but I felt I had that support and a plan in place. And then when I went to high school, it was literally, I was just a normal kid, just in the system, just having to kind of get on with it. And if I didn't hand homework in on time or something, I'd be, you know, punished, like I was lazy and I didn't, you know. So yeah, high school was tough, but I managed to get through it. Had a really good close group of friends around me, which they've stuck by me. You know, we're still really close friends now. I think that's also good if you've got a good group of friends that you can talk openly about what you've got and everything, and they try and support me. And then I went off to college. I did travel and tourism, but obviously just now you can't really do much with travel and tourism, but I hope to get into that at a later stage. I also, about 6 or 7 months ago, I moved out into my own place. So I moved out of my mum's house and I'm now living on my own. And that's got its benefits, but it's also got its challenges. It's pretty difficult sometimes, you know, just remembering daily tasks and everything. Like living at home, my mum kind of did everything for me, like, which is great. Like, she pampered me. But then when I was set out, you know, on my own into the real world, it's a bit daunting. But yeah, again, I've had support from friends to kind of help me through that and everything. So yeah, personally, when I did find out, I'd known for a while I had FASD, but I hadn't really researched it. And it was when I found the hub that when I managed to actually speak to someone and get all the resources, I was like, I'm not alone in this, because I really didn't know how many people had this, and the more people I'm speaking to, the more webinars I'm taking part in, I'm like, wow, there's actually quite a few. And I don't know who said, but it's more common than autism. So it's a relief having a diagnosis, and it's a relief knowing there's resources and people out there to help. Yeah, so that's it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Demi. Thank you, and happy birthday from all of us.
Thank you.
And thank you for coming and sharing your birthday with us in this very strange world that we now all live in.
Yeah.
And thank you for sharing so honestly as well about your journey thus far. We're so excited to have you working with us and doing all the amazing things that you have been doing, especially like leading up to Adoption Week, but also during FASD month as well. So thank you. I'm just going to share a couple of slides with people because everybody's mentioned around the diagnosis and with FASD how common it is, and I just thought it would be really good just to recap. So some of these things obviously Sarah covered in her presentation, but those things about the fact that FASD is the most common neurodevelopmental condition in the UK. In fact, you probably could say in the world. It's affecting around 3 to 5% of the general population. And for the care experienced population, that's going to be considerably higher, estimated around, could be as high as 35%. Certainly research that was done in Peterborough showed that up to 75% of children who were going for a medical as part of a pre-adoption placement order had a history of prenatal alcohol exposure. As Sarah said in her video, having that prenatal alcohol history does not equal FASD. So by no means that all of those children that were getting placed, that 75%, had FASD. But it's a good indicator of the fact that, you know, they might need some additional support and help. I think it's also important to remember that you get an FASD diagnosis because you meet a criteria. So you have to have a minimum of those 3 brain domains, which is significantly impacted, is what the SIGN guideline talks about. But you could still have impacts of prenatal alcohol exposure. It's just that you wouldn't meet the criteria to get a diagnosis. I think that's really important for us to bear in mind. The fact that FASD is a lifelong condition, neurodevelopmental, neuro is for the brain and developmental means life. And, you know, there isn't a cure, but as Demi and Carol have both amazingly shown just by what they've shared with us so far today, with the right supports and early interventions, there can be significant benefits for the individual, and they can be very, very successful in life. Well, Sarah talked about facial features and kind of showed you what they were, but again, I think it's really important for us to know that actually only 10% of people who get an FASD diagnosis will actually have those facial features. So, you know, we can't tell just by looking at somebody. And also, people mask really, really well. Girls do that more than boys. You know, there is some things to do with the gender in this. But also the fact that, you know, behaviours, if you're just going purely on behaviours, can look sometimes that somebody's just being disobedient on purpose, and that isn't the case. I, as a parent, always want to think can't, not won't, and that really, you know, has to help me stay regulated, to help my child stay regulated as well. FASD is a whole body diagnosis. You know, there are over 400 associated conditions that can go along with FASD, and so it's from that it then also makes it an invisible condition, because this isn't something that you can see just by looking at an individual. So I'm just going to, I don't know whether I did actually share my slides there, but hopefully I did. And that's just giving people kind of just a roundup and an overview of what we've all been talking about to this point. So we're going to now move into our No slides, sorry. We're now going to move into having our discussion as a panel, and we've got a set of questions. So I'm just going to go to gallery view. So I've got everybody on. I don't know why I can't see myself though. Maybe somebody else can unhide me. I don't know why I'm hiding. And if I could just ask the panel to unmute themselves, that would be great. And just at this point, for everybody who is watching, if we could ask you if you'd like to start using the Q&A at this point, so that as we go through our discussion, we can draw in some of your questions that you've got, but also I think there might be somebody else who's not with us, who's not muted, so maybe that person could mute themselves. Must be one of the team in the background. That would be great. So first of all, we just talked when we met as a group about our light bulb moment, and I guess I just would like to know from each of you, what was your key turning point in your FASD journey? So I don't know, maybe could I come to Miranda first of all, just randomly picking somebody?
Okay. Okay, so I probably would say I've had lots of turning points in my practice, and something that you're always on the journey to learn about this. I think you kind of come to one point and you suddenly think, oh, there's something else that's happened. And I would say in terms of my own practice as an educational psychologist, it was when I first attended the Scottish Government training on FASD assessment. And I just sat there thinking, wow, first of all, the prevalence and kind of, the estimates of this, and, I suppose knowing about prenatal alcohol exposure and how it can, contributes to development. But I think as a professional, I realized, wow, I've got a real opportunity as an educational professional to contribute and to collaborate in the assessment process. It is a collaborative process. It is multidisciplinary. So I'm on home visits, I'm on consultations, I'm on observations, I'm on school visits. I'm always gathering information. That information is, is incredibly useful, and it can be shared with health. It can be shared across school as well. And I think that was a bit, I suppose, when I was talking to others, I thought, wow, we could really make a difference here, and we can support this because we are doing it. So I think sometimes professionals have that kind of maybe assumption it has to be a very specific form of assessment, but actually, what we do all the time, we're always gathering that in kind of contextual information as well. And I think, when I've worked with social workers, it's maybe sometimes explaining and chatting to them about the diagnostic guidelines and how you need to have confirmation of prenatal alcohol exposure. So the bit where we do the developmental history and we talk about, what's happened before and what was that like when the birth parents, and what was going on, and how do you see that development progressing, or whatever. Lots of really good information in that help. My second moment was actually when I had a meeting with Ali. So I think we were talking about some training materials, and it was really good. These kind of really basic questions kind of come back going, well, why are you doing that? And I was like, well, I'm going to do this and that. And it was about training and providing information leaflets. And I thought, actually, I don't need to do that. So it's trying to sometimes kind of think, well, am I actually going to make the kind of the most difference in terms of what I can achieve within a big system? And I suppose within education, I see myself supporting my colleagues on this journey as well, introducing them, working obviously with lots of different disciplines, working with FASD Hub. And also when I'm working with educators, I'm always thinking about, we do need to kind of upskill our staff to understand, yes, this is FASD, but this is a child in front of you. They're amazing at art, they're amazing at all these different things, but they're clearly needing support in terms of their memory. Maybe they can't hold the information. So what are we going to do about that? So making, I suppose, the strengths in their profile much more accessible, so it doesn't feel like such an overwhelming diagnosis, and that, well, if I have this diagnosis as a barrier and I don't understand what to do now, it's actually just making it just accessible within our systems and making sure we are supporting kids as well. I think those are my main turning points.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. I've turned my microphone off because it's very windy where I am. Thank you, Miranda, that's great. And I remember those early conversations that we had together, and those sort of like, well, you know, so that, thank you. I feel privileged to be included in your turning point. Gemma, could I ask you the same question?
Yeah, when I was thinking about this question, it was obviously phoning you guys was one. The other big one for me was getting the diagnosis, and I think at first we'd be like, well, yeah, duh, but there's actually loads of reasons why that was kind of our big like light bulb moment and turning point. So for one thing, the most obvious one, you know, all of our research and investigations and badgering people as a family, you know, it was kind of vindicated. You weren't being that overly sensitive parent that everyone was kind of suggesting that you were, really. That was the main thing. But there was also things like the way that we parent. You know, there's therapeutic parenting, for example, and there's the non-violent resistance parenting. I mean, we were very traditional parents. We were trying to be, you know, traditional parents in that way of, not just timeouts and kind of the strict, but just in a whole way, we didn't really take into account, you know, anything else. We were trying to, it was like square peg round hole. We were trying to be types of parents that wasn't right for our child. And when we had this diagnosis, it was like, it just gave us the opportunity to really start changing the whole way that we approach parenting, and the difference it has made. I mean, I can't overstate it. I really can't. It might look a bit strange to other people. It feels a bit strange sometimes, but the difference in our daughter is unbelievable, and that came from the diagnosis as well. Another reason is a kind of a sad one, but it's true, that people who don't really know you, and people that do know you, I suppose, they will make more adjustments, and they'll be much more kind and accepting to Isabel's behaviour, because a lot of it can look like she's being naughty, you know, and I'm positive that if she didn't have that, and I didn't have the confidence to say, actually, she's got this condition, they're much more accepting of it. And not to say that it's okay, but they'll be much more willing to, you know, work with me and talk with me, and I'm very open about it. And it's just so great to have this as the reason why it's happening. So that's a big thing as well. And also now we have the diagnosis, we can plan. You know, we can that whole chunk of our lives that was taken up with, what is this? How do you know that all of that energy and worry? It's now, that can now shift into, right, this is what it is, and it's not the end of the world, and there's so many amazing things about her, and you know, we can start planning for next week, next month, next, you know, what might, and having an idea of things that might come up, whilst knowing that whatever does come up, you know, we can access support. So kind of all those reasons, getting a diagnosis was our kind of light bulb moment, I suppose.
Brilliant, thank you so much. I think I really resonate with that as a parent as well. It's even when you sit in that room and you're completely convinced that this is what it is, and that that's the diagnosis, that's the right thing, there is still an element of, you know, kind of hearing it. There's the whole going through a grieving and a loss, but then just being able to look forward to the future and think, yeah, you know, this is not the end of the world. This is just a thing, and we're gonna get past that. So absolutely.
I was speaking about it with my friend the other day, like, who her little one looks like she might have autism, so it's different in that way. But I think as parents in society, you know, we do very easily spout this thing about, oh, you know, everybody's different and it's okay. And it's only like when you have a child that's different, it's like, no, it really is. Like, it's, you know, and we have to show them that it's okay. It's not, you know, it's not a big deal. I think we're all, you know, very good at talking the talk, but actually when you have to walk the walk, it's a great feeling actually to be like, yeah, you're different, so is everybody.
Yeah.
You know?
Totally. I know we recorded, as part of Adoption Week Scotland, we've recorded a podcast, so if anybody's got time, go to the Adopt Scot website and have a listen of them, and one of them is with a group of teens. And then during that, one of the young men on it has got FASD, and then one of the other teenagers says to him, "Well, that's great, isn't it? Because yeah, like we've all got different brains." And you know, they were just so accepting of one another. It's priceless. You have to listen. It's 4 minutes that you'll not have wasted of your life. Thank you, Gemma. Lynn, could I come to you and ask you the same question? What was your key turning point in your journey with FASD?
Yeah, I think when I was thinking about this question, what sprung to my mind was over 4 years ago, a meeting that young man who couldn't look at me, who hid under a blanket, and you know, it just took a lot of time to listen, to build that relationship up. A lot of time. It was time, and that's what he needed. And I know a lot of other children with FASD. It's time, and I think it was seeing him being able to sit and play the guitar in front of me freely with no music, self-taught. And it was like a proud mum moment, sitting watching him just sit and play, you know, little snippets of all these rock songs. And I just was like, you know, you've got a hidden disability and that doesn't stop you from doing anything that anybody else can do. So for me, it was seeing that moment, and then being able to watch him progress on to last year, to be able to go and see Kiss in concert. That huge, you know, show, that production, and there was lots of plan A's, B's and C's, a credit to his family, but he was able to go and able to do that. And for me, that was my light bulb moment that, you know, children with FASD, they just need time, they need support, they need the right environment and professionals that get it. And I think that was one of the things from his mum in particular, who will say, you don't know how much it means to me that you get it, you believe me. And it was that part of, they've spent years of not being believed. So for me, that's been my light bulb moment over the last 5 years.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lynn. That's so great to hear. And it's so lovely to hear that reflection that it's about the relationships. And I think that is so key, that for, you know, whether that's a parent-child relationship, a teacher-child, or, you know, social worker, support worker, to have, you know, it is fundamentally about our relationships. So there's lots of questions coming in, and we will get to your questions. Don't panic, everybody. It's just 2 o'clock and we've got plenty of time. So we kind of, as a team, have just constructed some things that we wanted to share with you. So I'm just going to ask Demi and Carol just to come in now with what they thought were their the kind of changes and things that helped them. What were the positive things? I'm thinking maybe about education in particular. I don't know who would like to go first.
So for me, when you're talking about turning points and stuff like that, there's been 2 for me. So obviously, being adopted, my mum and dad was the biggest turning point that could have possibly happened. To think about where I was to where I am now, I'm very, very grateful for everything that they've done. The second turning point would then be probably college for me. You know, I scraped through high school, got the grades that I needed to get to do primary teaching. But obviously my mum and dad dropped me up in Cotton Wool because they were trying to protect me, and I got shipped off to Aberdeen. So of course I had no social skills, no life skills, then failed miserably and came home. But coming to college, you know, you're treated as an individual. It was different to high school, it was different to, you know, anything else that I could experience. And they'd be listening to you, what you needed to do, what interventions you needed, or what problems you thought could happen, and they got you to speak about the solutions that you thought could be brought in. You know, if there was any triggers or any flags that could happen, you were then actively asked, what solutions do you think, or what, you know, prior to that, with how things are going forward. And through the college, it led to lots of opportunities. I was brought up to not talk about my past, and that was just because my dad was really fashioned. So it was more a case that doing that meant that I was able to talk about my past in a positive way, so to speak, you know, reflecting on what had happened, where I am now, and how that affects me going forward, and how it's made me the person I'm. Much things like I was really shy and unconfident, didn't believe in myself, and then college really spurred me on. I became student president. I spoke in Parliament about my story. You know, I went on to do a degree that I didn't think I could do because I dropped out, you know, so many years ago, feeling like a failure. But here I'm now being able to do that. You know, encouraging and trying to widen access for other students, and seeing how important it is for you know students to be actively involved in their learning, and the plans and stuff in place for them. I mean, I know it's cliche, but like if a flower isn't, you know, thriving in its own environment, you don't change the flower, you change the environment. The nurture debate, the nurture side of it is so important. You know, my mum and that, you know, installed that from a young age, and I see myself doing it with my own kids now as well. And the college, I feel, do that. The last 3 years I've been actively involved, you know, in putting support in place for care experience students, and being able to use my experience to help others, and to hear a different side of the voices and experiences, because I think a lot of the support that's been in place is for under 26-year-olds, and it's like, well, you know, when we hit over 26, there's still a lot of issues that we come across, that life throws at us, and how we have to deal with that. So it's for me, it was good coming back to education at a later stage, and being able to give, you know, the adult learner voice, and you know, the implications we have and how it still affects us going forward. So yeah, I think I answered the question somehow, and amongst all that.
Thank you so much for that. Sorry, we had to turn Carol's video off because the link between, I think, her bandwidth mustn't be very wide, so we couldn't quite hear you at the beginning there, Carol. So don't worry that your image is turned off, but we know you're still there and very much involved in the conversation today. And quite a lot of people asking about getting a diagnosis, whether that makes it easier. I think somebody asking that specifically to you, Gemma, but just before we move on to that, I just wanted to ask Demi just to reflect on that question as well, about what things made it easier at school maybe, or what things made it more challenging.
I'd have to say the challenging thing first, because the main issue, especially high school, was being just treated as a normal kid. And maybe they thought that was good because they didn't want to draw attention to me. Maybe that's why they did it, but I rarely got one-to-one support in high school, and it was so frustrating because I really wanted to get somewhere. You know, I wasn't expecting to come out with A's and B's and hires and advanced hires, because I knew I wouldn't be able to do that. But I certainly wanted to come out with something, and not getting that support was tough. So that was the challenge. I guess the good thing, I know primary school there was a lot of meetings between the teachers and my mum that I would come in at a few times and like discuss like a learning plan. I don't know what it's all called nowadays. So I guess that was good, but I definitely got more support in primary than I did high school. And it's that I didn't really get much help over the transition period. That's a huge thing, is the transition between primary and high school. And I know Lynn's nodding because you'll know right now what's going on. It's such a big step. I was petrified, really. And thankfully I had friends around me that I knew, so I had something familiar in a new environment. So it took me a while to settle in, but yeah.
I think you're absolutely right. Quite often primary tends to be maybe a more nurturing place. There is more opportunity for adults to make relationships with children. It's generally one teacher, a class of students, with a couple of other people coming in during the week, you know, do peripatetic type or sports or whatever, but it's generally just one adult and the group of students. Whereas at high school, you know, you could have 7 different teachers, couldn't you, in one day? You could have 3 different teachers just for one subject in a week.
Yeah, I think that was tough for me, because like the changing from one subject to another. At least in like college, I was studying one subject. Maybe there was the odd, you know, the core skills as well. but I wasn't having to, for an hour I'm doing maths and then I'm off to geography and then I'm off to music or something. It was just, it took me a while to, engage my brain into, right, okay, we've moved on now.
Yeah, so something that a characteristic or symptom that we might commonly see for an individual with FASD is that ability to concrete learning, but then to move that learning from one area to another area. So you're right, even if that's, and I've now got to move my mind from thinking about maths to thinking about English, using quite different aspects of learning and the way that you need to focus, perhaps in the classroom. Even, the style of teaching is going to be quite different. And obviously practical subjects different again. So absolutely. Thank you, Demi. I don't know whether Miranda's got anything she'd like to add from an educational point of view to that.
Yeah, I think in terms of education, when I'm thinking about, what's going on for young people, I suppose in a primary school or a secondary school environment, I always think about the actual environment. So, what supports are in place in terms of how are we going to help the young people kind of remember their timetable, how to organise themselves to get around the building, what can they do themselves and what do they need support with? Because it's not about, somebody doing it all for you, but giving you a hand where you think it's kind of most helpful. Again, things like recording work, so when you're getting work in the classroom, is kind of really accessible. Does the young person understand the instructions, the tasks? Is the homework available? Can it be shared with parents? And I think that's part of the bigger picture of really good communication with young people. So making sure that they're involved as well and asking them what they want. But also saying to parents, here's the topic we're covering, or here's some homework that we're doing, or actually, what the person's doing lots in school, so actually they don't need to focus on this, but they can maybe focus on this. So it's really having those conversations with people directly rather than assuming, just because the person has FASD, what can they do and what kind of support would they like themselves, I think.
Absolutely. So just because somebody's got a diagnosis of any condition, let's face it, that doesn't define who they are, but it may mean that they need to access the curriculum in a slightly different way.
Yeah, and I think I've had some brilliant conversations with young people in school, and sometimes I think we need to recognise part of, the diagnosis and understanding and having that information about them, that sometimes they're a bit tired and they just need a break. So you might get into things like, the confabulation and talking about and the most brilliant and creative stories and wonderful experiences that they're going to tell you about. And then you're thinking, well, I think we're supposed to be doing some reading here. Now we're talking about the buses or something amazing. But it's recognising actually that part of their day, they just need a bit of time out because they're doing so much and they're doing things so well. So it needs to kind of factor in, are they going to have a movement break? Or actually could they maybe, help somebody else? So looking at kind of peer skills as well. There's lots of different things. And I think that's a bit about the individuality that we always need to focus on.
Absolutely. And I think I've heard it said before, I think if you've met one child with FASD, you've met one child with FASD. This is a spectrum disorder, it says it in the title, and somebody it's also what we often refer to as a spiky profile. So people can do something in the morning, but in the same activity in the afternoon, they wouldn't be able to access the parts of their brain to enable them to do that, or even transferring skills. So, you could do it yesterday, but you can't do it today. Somebody was telling me just the other day about their child having, achieved to be able to ride a bike one day, but then got up the next morning really excited because they've done it, and actually they're not able to the next day. So, can demonstrate in real practical ways. And obviously, when it comes to school, that's in English.
And I think we talk a lot about reinforcement or overlearning, and that's really good to a point. But you also want to kind of really motivate a young person that they want to do these things and that there's a purpose to it as well. And I think that's that's something that we're always saying. They can, when teachers say, but they're really not closing this gap. And I think the point is, they're not going to close a gap not necessarily. And I always love that picture in Sarah's presentation about, all the different ages that you have. Maybe they've got expressive skills and they're like 17 years old, and their chronological age is 18, but their language skills are amazing, but in terms of the comprehension it's much, and that's the spiky profile that you're referring to. But again, it's an individual, they're working at their own pace, they should have their own individual targets, and that's the bit that I think we help schools make it more accessible and make them kind of realize that it's not a blanket diagnosis, it's not a blanket, here's a whole lot of strategies and they'll just all work, because it never, and that's quite demoralizing for everybody when you're thinking, I'm really trying hard and it's not going well. It's maybe just sitting back and just taking a time out to think, right, well, what can we do here?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't, Gemma, we could ask you, we've got a specific question here from somebody watching who's asking, are there particular strategies that work well at home or school? So in your experience, obviously, and it's with this individual child, but might be relevant for other people to hear.
Yes, well, interestingly enough, when she started school, I went in, with all this information and, all this information specifically about her and about FASD and all these coping strategies. She's only in primary 2, and there is a little bit of, this is a crazy parent, because apparently she's absolutely fine, and not just fine, but like happy, compliant, no problem with concentration. It's just like, okay, I'm not complaining, that's good. So I have all the strategies to kind of pass on to school as and when they need it, but so far it's like no news is good news. So at home, I go back to therapeutic parenting and NVR always. I don't know if many people know what therapeutic parenting is. It's not about being a therapist to your child. It's a whole other way of parenting that's highly structured, but highly nurturing at the same time. So things that work, again, for us, I completely agree with you, Ali, that if you meet one person with FASD, that's all you've done, because it's so, as everybody is, so unique. But for us, things like routine, and I'm not just talking about a general routine, I'm talking about doing even saying exactly the same things, using the same spoon for breakfast, telling me what she wants for breakfast in exactly the same order. And if I dare say one of them, do you want a big bowl or a small bowl? If I say that out of order, it's like, no, start again. So routine is a big thing in our house, and that really does help. Another thing that springs to mind is kind of picking your battles. I think maybe a more traditional parent, and obviously I'm friends with lots of traditional parents, and I envy them sometimes, because it's like they can have this approach of, what I say goes. I say do it, you do it. I can't have that, not all the time. There are obviously things around safety, and there are things, there are certain things that there is a no-brainer. There is no, what's the word?
Flexibility.
That's the one. It's just like, no, but they are very few and far between. And actually a lot of our life is about compromise, and is about, trying to just find the way to get her from point A to B, that keeps her calm and keeps her, happy, if that makes sense. And it's not necessarily, it's very rarely actually the way that we would like to do it. It should just be do this, do that. But it's not. So it's pick your battles is a big one. So, for example, we found very early on that, all the traditional parenting, and we were very much like that bedtime routine, which kind of goes against what I just said. But bedtime routine, we tried to do, as all the parents books say, bath, pajamas, books, no screen time, and we found with our child that actually doing that made her much more anxious. Mm-hmm. So we had to create our whole new bedtime routine just for her, which goes completely against, she watches her tablet until bedtime, because that's what keeps her calm. She goes under a blanket and she watches her screen until she falls asleep. It's not exactly, the cozy family connect, reading stories that you wish that you had. But we've found out through 6 years of experience that that's what keeps her calm. That's what, and that's what we choose over a bedtime routine, that most people would do. So yeah, pick your battles is one of them. And what else? I think just always choosing, this sounds really strange, but like always choosing, there's this phrase in, I think it's therapy parenting, think connection before correction. And that's a big one for us, you know, and it does go against that, you know, if they're doing something, it's pulling back and going, wow, you know, that's a really interesting choice. You know, I like what you're doing there. However, you know, rather than don't do that, stop that right now. It's choosing connection before, it's that nurture. It's trying to keep that connection continuously with your child. So you're always building that relationship and that trust rather than correction. They're kind of a few things that spring to mind that work for us anyway. But therapeutic parenting changed our life.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Absolutely, I totally agree from a parenting point of view. But I think as well the thing about, for those that Gemma mentioned NVR, that's non-violent resistance, but that's nothing to do with safe holds or anything like that. It is basically about looking at what are the key things that we absolutely can't let happen. So, you know, child-to-parent violence, we can't accept violence, and, you know, what are the other key things that so you sort of have baskets and you scale them, and then you realise that actually table manners are so in a green basket. We just can't lose our mind over
putting
table
everything
manners.
into perspective, you know. Absolutely. And I think that's something that maybe, you know, parents of maybe more traditional children, they can afford to just have everything on the same level as importance, and actually we can't, because, you know, again, it sounds really strange, but if my daughter doesn't want to do something, it doesn't happen. And, you know, and that sounds very odd even saying that. You know, I'm thinking, well, you know, before I became a parent, it was, well, if I say it happens, it happens. No, it doesn't. because she will literally get to the point of, you know, biting you, so you have to go to the doctor and get antibiotics because your arm's bleeding because you asked her to put her jacket on and she didn't want to. So you just go, don't wear your jacket. Who cares? You know, and something you said, Ali, about thinking can't rather than won't. That is a big one, because I think I said before, just a little example, last night she had been in muddy puddles in the park all afternoon after school. So she came home, got in the bath. And the bath a few days ago, she'd asked for her goggles and I didn't know where they were. And I'd said that time, your next bath, I'll get your goggles. But of course, this was a surprise bath last night. It wasn't planned because she'd been in muddy puddles. So halfway through, she says, you said I would have my goggles. And I was, oh, you know, I'm really sorry, darling. You're absolutely right. This was kind of a surprise bath. I'll look them out for next time. Her response to that is literally to start chucking water at me, leaping out of the bath, you know, mouth open, claws out, you know, and it's like, what? And I think a lot of people would be like, even maybe me, you know, it'd be like, God, what a brat. You know, you don't have your goggles. But she cannot, in her brain, I said she would have goggles, and she can't cope with the fact that she didn't have them, you know. That's just one example. You can do that a million times a day, and she goes from 0 to 100, you know. So yeah, can't rather than
seconds flat. And I think when we're talking about kind of thinking from an education home, you know, social worker hearing that kind of story as well, that when you're living with it, sometimes you just think, you know, I wish I had cameras all around my house and I could film this, because nobody would actually believe what's happened just now.
I think school still doesn't, to be honest, even though I have shown them videos. So I get a sense of, really?
Yeah.
That was I must say that was the same with my mum going to school, you know, because like I brought all the aggression back to my mum. She got it all, you know. I was well behaved at school, you know, and as soon as I got home, it was just, 0 to 100 in seconds, you know.
And why do you think that was? Like, why?
I think it was just, it was holding back my issues that I was having at school. I was very quiet in school. I didn't really want to ask for help or, you know, draw attention to myself, you know, so I just keep it all to myself until I go home.
Okay.
And then, yeah, I was just completely out of control sometimes, you know. Yeah.
I think a thing that you mentioned as well is that I think for me as well, echoing what Demi, and that's when you go home, it's your safe place, so you feel you can be yourself at home, whereas when you were at school, you were, like Demi said, you were masking everything that was going on, so when you got home, it was just a relief, and that's just what came with it, and my mum got the brunt as well, sort of thing. But I think it's more that thing where you're safe and you can be you. Just watch that.
Yeah, absolutely. If everybody could hear that Carol was just saying that masking at school is a big thing, but then being back at home is your safe place. And I'm seeing Lynn very much nodding her head there, and I'm just wondering whether you have any reflections on that from a social work point of view as well.
Yeah, my experience with the young lad that I work with, I was with him at the end of his journey of primary school, which for him wasn't a good experience. It was mainstream primary. He went through years of low-level bullying. Again, parents not masking everything, taking it home, parents not being believed that this was the type of behaviour that was happening. And then we had... Well, we actually led on to, there was a lot of safety issues with him, and it got to the point where it was really out of control and he got really hurt, unfortunately, which then led to us actually finding him a resource in a residential school. And that was the turning point for him in his journey of education, because he was accepted. There was other young people that had, you know, different difficulties, but he was accepted and was actually in an environment that he was actually able to learn. And he had that for over a year, which was just lovely to see, you know, how far behind he was to actually how far he's come. And we're now back in the situation of that. Demi talked about it, that transition. That was, you see me nodding about that, Demi, that transition to high school. And even though he's not in the mainstream side of that, he, you know, he's in the supported side, that still is causing so many anxieties for him, which is now coming out again at home and in placement. And we know that trigger is education, and it's that learning side of it. He wants to do it all, but he just can't do it all at the moment. He needs that support. He needs those people around him in education to get that. There was something that I've read in regards to FASD that always sticks out to me, and it reminds me so much of him in particular. FASD children have a 10-second brain in a 1-second world, and it's just, I keep going back to it, and I know I'm a broken record. It's time, and that's what it keeps coming back to. We need to give these young people time, because they will catch up.
Absolutely.
I was just going to add, in terms of, I suppose, it's just recognising, you know, this is for lots of different kind of people across the UK, but in Scotland, I suppose what we're working with in terms of Lynn and myself as professionals, we're working within different authorities, and each authority has a different process for education and for accessing supports. It has a different process for placements. It has different processes for lots of different things, to access services in terms of social work, all these different things. So I think for parents, you know, that is in itself is just trying to safeguard that. And I know that, you know, Gemma talked about kind of advocating, and I suppose that there's that bit that Demi's now, you're saying you're advocating for yourself, and it's doing that. And that's a huge thing that I suppose we're working towards as professionals, that we want people to communicate, we want people to be able to kind of share their understanding, but we're not quite there yet. But that's an added, I suppose, barrier to the whole thing. It's not just about the diagnosis, it's not just about supporting an individual. We're also working with these systems that are really hard sometimes to navigate, full stop. So I sometimes think it's just finding that person who's the right person to help you advocate in your school, or that professional you think, right, that's a good working relationship, and kind of getting that on board can make, I think it can help the journey to some degree.
Thank you very much. You must have read one of the questions here, Miranda. No, at all, which was about, for you and Lynn, about challenges of getting colleagues in your representative fields to acknowledge the prevalence or impact of FASD. And I think what you're both describing there, it is that exact thing, is, you're working within different systems, and maybe you're placing a child from one area into another area, or a child is coming into an education setting from another area, but in all of those things there's going to be differences. And although we have the SIGN guidelines, which is our guidance for diagnosis, even that is still going to differ depending where you are, which local authority you're living in, and how far along that neurodevelopmental pathway that area of health is as well. So I don't, unless either of you got anything specific you'd like to reflect on that question.
I was just going to say, I did answer the question in the Q&A bit as well, Ali, but I think I was just saying, I've had more positive encounters, and I think from professionals within education, part of research kind of indicates that actually education is, does work towards kind of understanding diagnoses. Sometimes though, kind of realizing that and what it looks like can be tricky. But I think it's the wider issue, I think, in terms of, working with our, like I suppose Gemma was referencing, so that it's not a go-between system. It should be a much more cohesive system, a team around a child, so that everybody's talking the same language, everybody understands each other's roles, and we're not going back into, I suppose, where there's all these different little silos and everybody does their own bit, but nobody kind of brings it together.
Lynn, were you going to say something?
Yeah, it was just to add that I totally agree with Miranda and what she's saying there, and I think we've had in my journey with this particular family so many different silos and so many different opinions and judgments going on. And again, it just comes back, it's not down to getting at one particular service or giving another service a really hard time. I think it comes back down to lack of knowledge and understanding of FASD. And I think one of my points that I really kind of keep trying to get across, we've got lots of children and young people out there that have ADHD, ODD, autism, and depending on what profession that you're in, you adapt that environment, that service, to meet the needs of that child. Why should it be any different for children that have got FASD? And I think that's just that important message that I want to keep getting across, because we are nearly 5 years into this journey, and we are now sitting with a team around this child, and people are getting it, and he does have a really bright future ahead of him. But we need that to continue.
Absolutely, because every individual deserves that bright future, don't they? And whatever their neurodevelopmental condition is, if they have one or not diagnosed, whether they, everybody deserves an education and has a right to that, and a future as well. And just some people are going to need more support to get there than others. Thank you so much. I'm just 20 to 3, so we have got a little bit extra time, and if people that are watching have any other questions that they feel that we've not covered, then please do step in and put those in the Q&A. I'm just wondering whether I could ask Carol and Demi if you've got any link, sort of like where you felt that there's been really good examples of good support that you've received that you would want to share, that the things from your own experience, whether that's earlier on in life or currently.
I'll go. So for me, it was college. I think I've said that already. Coming to college and people taking interest in you, your background, and something where I would normally shy away from talking about, was allowed to openly speak about it, and people showed an interest and thought, do you know what? People say all the time, they're like, you're so inspiring, whereas I'm just little old me that had a bit of bumpy road, and I'm all right now. but they say it's good for people with lived experience to be working in the college because they're understanding a lot more of the students that are coming through the doors. Student cohorts totally different year on year. So being able to share those experiences with other students. What we've found is that, you know, working in the college, students that are coming in who have care experience, whose barriers are already up as soon as they're about to walk in the door, because 95 people have probably been involved with their life up until that point. They don't want to trust the next person that says that they're trying to help them, but when they can relate with you and you can kind of share experiences with them, the barriers come down a lot quicker, because they feel that you're a normal person, and it's not a case that you've read a book and you know the answers. It's that you've been there, bought a t-shirt, probably done worse than what they have, sort of thing. So I think that's, you know, a big thing for me, and the support from the college, but also from, you know, external people like, you know, Children's here in Scotland, where I'd ended up speaking at their recruitment events and stuff like that, then became on to be a panel member because they said lived experience is really valuable. So realising that there's things that have happened in your past shape you for who you are, and it's how you use them going forward. And I think for a lot of us, it's not until you get, you know, later on in life where you reflect on the things that have happened and you realise, you know, not all the negative things turn out to stay negative. You know, they do turn into positives, and that's how you use them going forward. But if I hadn't went to college and had the support from, you know, inclusion team, you know, the student association, guidance, everybody that took an interest in me and kind of like helped me, I wouldn't have flourished and got to where I am today. So I shout for the rooftops about all that. And then being able to now work in the college and be able to do the same for other students come in is really, really good. So yeah, definitely the college for me.
Thank you, Claire, Carol, so much. That's great. And I'm sure that if I was one of your students and was coming to you, then I'd be so encouraged by just your openness to share that. Demi, were you going to?
I think actually getting in touch with the hub and you guys give me the opportunity to be a panelist on all the webinars and everything and share my experience has really helped me discover myself as a person, and I'm realising the impact I'm having on others with FASD, or, you know, like caregivers and everything. And at the end of the day, it's all about spreading awareness and just helping each other out with like techniques and everything. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Well, we feel privileged to have you here, so it doesn't feel like we're doing you the favour, but thank you very much. So I've got some real specific questions, guys, that have come in. One of the persons watching has said they've been a social worker for 30 years in children's unit, children and families team, and then fostering and adoption, and went on a lot of training, but they're concerned that education staff lack an understanding of the impact on education for children and young people, and there's no specific training for teachers who could support the child and family. Do the panel, or what do the panel think about this, or what could be helpful? I guess my response to that would be that FASD Hub do, my little advert now, do provide training. We run a What is FASD, which is a half day, and if you book into a pre-arranged date that we advertise, and that's actually free for those that are living in Scotland. We also do a shorter version, which we could deliver directly to schools. And if you wanted something bespoke, it is not at all, you know, out of the cost of thinking that this is affecting potentially 1 in 20 children in the classroom, that you could use your PEF funding money, and it would be a very small percentage of that to have us come and do something bespoke. So that is an option. If you're a teacher sat there thinking we need this in our school, then please just get in touch and we can try and work out the right way and what's right for you. I guess it's also about looking to partnerships. So, you know, are there other schools in your area? Can you get in touch with your head through the head groups, through, you know, other groups that you meet as a teacher, to be able to connect with other people who are, you know, teaching a child with a diagnosis, and therefore you could share some of that best practice that is out there and is, you know, kind of coming up. But I just want to pose that maybe to Miranda first of all, being about education.
Yeah, so I was going to say actually, so City of Edinburgh have run in the last couple of years FASD training, and with health colleagues as well. and social work colleagues. But you're right. I mean, there has the person who's asked the question is right. I mean, I suppose there's been such a focus in terms of kind of establishing awareness among health professionals, because I think we've had this conversation before, Ali. If we don't diagnose, then there won't be anything, you know. People say, well, what is this condition about if nobody's diagnosed? Well, you know, so there's a lot of training that does need to be developed. We do have an educator resource, and it's not specific to Aaron and Ayrshire. It's kind of available, you know, through links. You just kind of Google it for educators as well.
Yeah.
I think and you're obviously FASD Hub. Do you know what I mean? So it's I think a work in progress. But I think flagging it to a school and saying, do you realise where you can kind of signposting some people and providing that information to them? And like you're saying, I suppose, kind of just reinforcing that message. Is there a school cluster? You know, is there something just, you know, because you can broaden it from FASD to kind of like, I suppose, disability. It is obviously a neurodevelopmental disability, so it's part of that. We need to be thinking about that, because we're really, I suppose, we're much more down the road, I suppose, in terms of ASD and thinking about that. But it's a similar path for FASD as well. So.
Yeah. Absolutely. Lynn, were you gonna? Thank you, Miranda.
Yeah, I was just going to say that we're definitely on the track of more training, and certainly I know that in our service within social work, Ali, you've come along and you've delivered some training to us and to other social work teams. I think I will always share anything that I get in relation to FASD, so I just share that on to schools, and we'll continue to talk about it, and it's a theme of meetings for my particular young man. So yeah, it's just continuing to share that knowledge, and as you said, signposting one school in particular just with where they could get that training if that's what they feel is needed.
Yeah. So in relation to the signposting, anybody could visit our website or our Facebook pages, and you'll find information about the training that we deliver. The resource that Miranda was making reference to and Sarah had in her video is the What Educators Need to Know, which is a great booklet that's been put together by the Ayrshire and Arran team, and in fact our What is FASD training has been developed with that team's input as well. So you know, it's something that we've just kind of sat in the silo and done, and you will find a link to that through our resources, which are on Adoption UK website. If you search for FASD Hub Scotland, you'll find all those resources there. But following this webinar, for those that have attended that booked in, we'll send out links as well, so you'll be able to get to that. So people are asking about the training that I mentioned. The next training that we have for parents and carers comes up on the 2nd of December, and again you can either email the hub or visit our Facebook page to find the link for that through Eventbrite. In relation to professionals, so we have a session specifically for professionals around the What is FASD. I think I'm right in saying that is going to be on the 13th of January. That might not be the right date, but I'm sure one of my, that is the right date. One of my colleagues is just confirming. So again, you can book that up through our Facebook page. Is always the best place to look for us. If you're not on Facebook, you can search for us on Eventbrite. We're also there as well if you don't do Facebook, because not everybody does. Booking's not open yet, sorry for the professionals, I'm just being told. So I'm sure it will be by the end of the week. Okay. So I'm just looking down the questions that we had when we spoke together and we were sort of preparing to come and talk to you. And we wanted to finish with some kind of positives and look at a section around what would be the key messages that we would want people to know about FASD, and what change would we like to see happen in the next 5 years. So if I could just pose those two questions and ask each of the panelists to address them one by one, that would be great. So I'll just start in my top left, which is Lynn, and ask you if you could just talk about the key message that you would want people to know about FASD and what you would like to see happen in the next 5 years.
I would really just like people to to take away from this and have a passion of researching FASD and learning about it, and being able to spread that message just helps. I think the more people that know about it, the more people that are involved in working with FASD, then the more positive destinations our young people are going to have. What I really would like to see change is more multi-agency working together, collaborative work, and we do need to be more creative about our resources. Unfortunately, this day and age, it does come down to resources and what support there is out there, but we can be more creative. We're all very intelligent adults that actually have a lot of knowledge, and if we could just pull that together, we could be more creative in what we could offer children and young people that do have FASD. And maybe just, and I'm thinking from a local authority point of view, and how they develop themselves in terms of education and how they provide support to children and young people, care experienced children and young people. And it's things, can we have our own residential school? Can we, it's all of those aspirations and hopes that I have for the next 5 years of this journey that we're all on.
Thank you, Lynn. Miranda?
Sorry. I think my key change, my key message really would be the importance of an FASD diagnosis. I think there's a huge research gap in terms of the voice of the child and the young adults. I think parental value of diagnosis is established, but I think we need to be kind of contributing to that and supporting that view that the diagnosis does add value. It supports the child. It gives them a sense of understanding about what their health, their ability to manage things is all about. And it definitely helps. I think Gemma alluded to kind of the parental well-being and your ability to manage those situations. And it's not going a parenting course when you've exhausted every parenting option out there. There's the significance of that. I suppose, again, I would add to Lynn's voice in terms of supporting the role of multidisciplinary collaboration, assessment is really key. And I think the more we educate ourselves, that supports that kind of collaboration and making sure professionals, whether in health or education or whoever is involved with the team around the child in planning meetings, that we're getting that prenatal alcohol history, because that's often missing, and that's one of the kind of key first steps that we need if we're going to support it and put it through the team around the child planning and asking for help. We need to be really clear about our evidence about why we're saying this child is finding it really difficult. They're saying they're finding it really difficult. We as parents, school, here's all our sources of evidence, let's move forward with that and recognise that as well. That's me.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Carol, can I come to you and ask you the same question? What would be key messages that you'd want people to know about FASD, and what would you like to see happen in the next 5 years?
I think one of the key messages for me is that having FASD is not the end of the world. We can, with the right support, like any child, the right environment, the right nurturing, we can achieve anything we put our minds to. Like I've said before, and I'll say it again, it's not what's happened to you, it's who you choose to become, and with the right support mechanisms in place, it's very much achievable. I think education's key. I think there should be more collaboration and joint up approach to it. A lot of people don't talk to each other enough. And I think it's maybe a lack of education, a touch of ignorance with some people, is if you don't know what you don't know. So for example, we put corporate parent training in as mandatory training for staff, so why shouldn't we be doing FASD training and things like that? So it's things like that looking forward, bigger picture, aspiration. Why are we not, I don't know if it's possible, but in my head, I think it would be good that when, kids are young and they get all their milestone checks, why are we not doing an FASD check at a young age? Even if it's just a scan or something, not everybody will sign up to that, but you know, going forward, it's a good idea. You know, early intervention is key. And I think it's more support, you know, for the parents as well, to know that they're not losing that you know, they are being listened to. So it's important for the parents to be listened to and believed about, you know, things that are happening, but it's also important then going forward that the child and young person is listened to going forward. That's me.
Thank you so much. And I think you touched on a really important point, which we haven't really covered in today's webinar at all, and that's about prevention. And that, you know, you can only have FASD by having prenatal alcohol exposure. It happens no other way. And prevention isn't just saying don't drink in pregnancy. I think it's about people understanding why, and understanding all of the parts, so, you know, that, as Sarah said in her video, just because alcohol exposure happens, it doesn't equal FASD. There are many other maternal factors in the case there, and I don't think any of us sitting here want to do any blaming. You know, it's not about that. It's about helping the individual. But there has to be something, and I think that goes right back again into education of the next generation, you know, the next generation of parents, that as they come into that place of, you know, babies potentially being made, that it's on their radar, that they understand, you know, alcohol in the same way that they would understand cigarettes, and understand putting on a seatbelt when they get into a car. So, you know, they're just considering it as a lifestyle choicing around considering getting pregnant, or when you find out that you are pregnant. Thank you very much. I'm going to come to Demi next and just ask the same two questions around what would be the key message you'd want people to know, and what would you like to see happen in the next 5 years?
Key message is a lot like what Carol said, in that FASD doesn't define you as a person, you know. Yeah, with the right support you can succeed. I'd like to hope I'm a good example, and you know, I'm living in my own place, and you know, getting on as best I can, try to live independently, you know. So it's, yeah, there is hope, and a lot of kids, young adults, have potential if they get the right support. Something I want to see in the future, I think for me, although I knew I had FASD from an early age, I didn't start getting my research until very recently. And I think there should be more around adults with FASD, because it's all, I think it's mostly based on children. And I think the issues can be different when it comes to adults. In terms of like independent living and money management and everything like that. So if people get a diagnosis later in life, then I think they need the support in a slightly different way than what young children would need, and caregivers. Yeah. Absolutely,
100%. And that's why we're so delighted that yourself and Carol are involved in FASD Hub and helping us to, you know, raise the profile of adults with FASD, and every single child will become an adult. That is a guarantee. And, you know, unfortunately, yes. Unfortunately, yeah. But as a parent, that is the one thing I can definitely say is going to happen to my child. They will become an adult. So it's really, really important that, you know, adults, services, supports, all of those things start to be come up the agenda. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Demi. And Gemma, same two questions to yourself.
The first one, key message, I would just echo what everyone else has said. Absolutely agree with everything everyone has said. Particularly the, you know, it's far from it. It's not the end. It's not the end of the world getting this diagnosis, and in a way, it's actually just very similar to, you know, anyone, you know, it's kind of key to being fulfilled and happy, for want of a better word. It is about finding out who you are, what's your strengths, what makes you happy, what your challenges are. You know, it's the same for everybody, not just people with FASD, but that is the thing that's going to make the difference for them. Changes I would like to see, would be ruling FASD out rather than in at birth. That would be a big one. And the other one is just information. I mean, there's still so many times in a week when I'm like, I'll see something in the media. I think the Archers, my mum was telling me the Archers had a storyline and they were calling it fetal alcohol syndrome. They weren't even using the right term. I was filling something out for our local council for the school actually the other day. It was to go on a trip. And there was this huge long pull down list of conditions that the child might have. FASD wasn't on it. You know, and I'm going, how is this possible? You know, they had everything you could think of, but not FASD. So just, we need more information out there. We need to start being more blatant about it, more, you know, more clear about it. There's just so much misinformation and guesswork going on. So yeah, that would be the key changes that I would like to see.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, everybody. This has been, I hope those watching agree, has been a fantastic session. I know we were billed to finish at 3:30 and we probably are going to finish a little bit earlier than that. But I don't go just yet because I have got a slide which I will actually attempt to share with you this time more successfully than my last two, which are very pretty slides, but unfortunately you didn't get to see them, so that's some help.
Can I just say, on what Gemma said about the two terms, fetal alcohol syndrome and then fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, I was diagnosed, and I don't know if it was just when I was born, 90s, when I think the term was fetal alcohol syndrome. That really restricted my research. There was very little to find, and it was when I came across the FASD Hub and started typing in FASD, then just the world just opened up with resources. So I think a lot of people that were diagnosed a few years back, they might have the same issue, and that on their doctor's letter or whatever, it's fetal alcohol syndrome and not fetal alcohol spectrum disorder.
Yeah, that's a really important distinction, Demi, and you'd be right that FAS would be something that was pretty much diagnosed at birth, and these days would call it FASD with facial sentinel facial features. I can't get my words out. You'd have FASD without. So that's like the 10% of people that we talked about that would have facial features, and then the 90% who wouldn't. And FAS would be the thing that would be diagnosed sort of more at birth, because of lack of thriving, head circumference, physical features. But yeah, is it now within the sign guidelines that we have, we just have the two diagnoses, FASD with or without the facial features. Would be if somebody was getting a diagnosis today, hopefully that is what they would get. So yeah, you're right, it's an important distinction. I think for me, my hope is that in 5 years' time, we're not still having these conversations, that we've moved a long way on from going, oh, where can I get some training? And, you know, oh, what is that? And having to explain to people what FASD means. I just hope we've moved a long, long way on. And, you know, we've got schools who are really up on it, and it's on that list of conditions along with all of the other neurodevelopmental conditions. And that also the pathway for diagnosis is so, you know, is more unified across the whole country, and it's clear and it's open. And, you know, for me, I just hope that we're in a completely different place in 5 years. We've come a long, long way in two, I have to say, a long way in 2 years. So it's all looking good. And some people have been asking about resources, so I'm just going to share this slide with you quickly, which I'm hoping that you can see the slide and not my notes. So this is just some key resources that people might want to look up. You can find the links to all of these through our website, but you've got the Ayrshire and Arran team. They are actually based in Ayrshire and Arran anymore. They are the Fetal Alcohol Advisory and Support Team, who are based in Edinburgh University now, but their literature still has the Ayrshire and Arran logos on it because that's where they were. But they've created two really useful documents, one for information for parents and carers, and one which is what educators need to know. To be honest, if you're a parent, carer, educator, social worker, any of the above, all of these are relevant to you. sign guidelines, and the team that produced them also produced a handbook that went along with the sign guidelines for parents and carers. It just really clearly explains the diagnostic path, what should happen during a diagnostic assessment, and explains around the brain domains, etc., which we totally haven't gone into today. There's also 3 books. If you were going to ask me, these would be my top 3 books. Book by Maria Catrick, Understanding FASD, Madness by our friend Jeff Noble. If none of you don't know who Jeff is, quickly get on Google after this, search him. He does a podcast all about FASD. He's very easy to listen to, absolutely fantastic if you're a caregiver, so supportive. And then the Parenting Children with an Invisible Disability, which is by Julia Brown, and with the one with the octopus on the front of it. So yeah, they've been my top 3. You'll see those resources that the Hub produce. You can download our free fact sheets, which are about to just get added to and made a lot bigger, so check them out in January. And then there's also loads of other stuff out there. As Demi said, if you type in FASD these days, all sorts of things come up. Some of us here were privileged to be able to, unfortunately, be able to go and join the training through CAN FASD last year, that when they came to Scotland. There's also FASD Hub Australia, and also within England you've got the National Organisation for FASD, who are based in London, and also the FASD Network. And there's a whole network of people, other smaller organisations across the UK. So FASD Hub Scotland is part of FASD Alliance. There's so many FASDs when you start talking about them all together. So if you visit the FASD Alliance UK website, you can find a full list of different organisations across the country if you're looking for support. So I just really want to thank everybody that's come along this afternoon. I really want to thank so much our panellists. Thank you to Lynn and Miranda for giving up their time and taking time out of their busy working week. Thank you so much to Gemma for giving up her time and not being available to do the school run today, so hoping that somebody else was. And thank you so much to Carol and Demi for sharing your lived experience, of which, you know, the rest of us just have a small insight to, but you are the people that really understand what the condition is like. So thank you so much for being here with us today. I see that there are lots of lovely, excellent webinar. Thank you everybody. That was great. Really interesting. Will it be recording? Yes, it has been recorded, and the recording will be available hopefully later this week if we're able to do that quickly enough. Thank you, lots of useful information. So some really fantastic feedback there from everybody. So thank you so much for listening to us today. I've been your host, and this has been the panel, and thank you very much.